Newton Thomas Siegel, cinematographer, here with director
Brian Singer. But I'm going to call you Tom, because that's...
Please do.
Because I don't even...
For 10 years, it's worked.
Yeah. Newton. Tom. Okay. Tom and I have worked together on how many movies now?
4 movies.
4 movies, and this is the first time we've ever done anything like this, so it will be, I'm sure, a little awkward.
For a mere moment.
For a mere moment.
Usually it's hand signals, but now we'll have to verbalize our communication.
Yeah, over the years, Tom and I have developed a very kind of second nature, unspoken language while working, so we can move through material a lot quicker and a lot of mind reading going on. So what are we looking at here, Tom?
These are the opening credits. They may look like animation, but we actually shot it all live. It was very hard to make it look like it's animated.
Mm-hmm.
This was done by a great friend of yours and title specialist, Robert Dawson.
Robert Dawson, who's done the titles on all our films, on The Usual Suspects. He chose the font on Apt Pupil, I believe, and even though we shot that sequence, and then on X-Men 1 and X-Men 2, he created this concept, which is why I wanted to bring him back. It's kind of our version of a James Bond opening.
And an intro right in, a circular theme, which you'll see in all your movies, going back to the coffee cup of Usual Suspects.
Yes, and even a little before that.
The water glass in
Public Access. Yes. So this scene, the concept behind this scene was ultimately to try to, where the first X-Men began at a concentration camp, emotionally with some sense of history, this scene was meant to sort of hopefully wow people and launch and launch us into the story and introduce a new character, which is Nightcrawler. So to do it, we ultimately, since there was no standing set of the West Wing of the White House in Vancouver, we ultimately, Guy Dias constructed it and with quite meticulously, and it enabled us a lot of flexibility, although we did do some doubling of sets just to expand the size of it.
Excuse me, sir. Are you lost?
We'll talk a little about this.
Yeah, it's a tough thing because you're dealing with a very familiar set that everybody's photographed a million times, and so we had to work pretty hard to try to give it a little different life and character, and a lot of that's with Brian's conception of Nightcrawler.
And then with each scene we shoot here, not only are some of these scenes, particularly the ones involving a lot of bamfing around and fighting, like here done with motion control cameras, but also where the stunt is done on the sets. Very often the stunt is done on a green screen, and here it's done with wires and cables, and then ultimately it has to be done in a clean pass, and then each separate action is done separately. The guy being kicked through the wall, Nightcrawler flying through the air, this guy throwing himself backwards without a tail existing, because the tail is added later in some of the shots. In fact, in most of the shots, but there are some where an actual rubber tail is used. And then all that material is combined to create this.
Don't shoot!
See this element, some of this will be shot on a green screen, flying and then added later. And then these guys flying around will be done separately. We didn't really know the blue smoke and the bamfing was going to work until very late in the process, until Mike Fink basically came into my hotel room in Kananaskis when we were shooting up there and said, okay, this is where we are with the bamf. And I was like, okay. And then he played it for me, and I was like, okay, I think we're getting there.
And it's such a hard thing for these actors because a lot of what they're doing is doing it to air or imagining what something's going to look like ahead of time.
Talk a little about
Kananaskis. We went to Alberta in Canada for this snow sequence. We needed an area that's famous for snow because Wolverine travels up to try to discover his origin in an area covered with snow. So we picked one of the snowiest areas in all of Canada, which, of course, when we went there had...
no snow. And as you can notice, way in the background there, you'll see where the snow stops and starts on the side of the lake, and that was where we brought in 40 tons of snow, and then where it ran out. This, oddly, and I shouldn't even admit to these things, but this was actually shot on a stage in London, 6 months after or 3 months after shooting. That was shot on a stage in Vancouver.
The amazing thing was we went all the way to Kananaskis for snow and figured we'd have horrible shooting conditions, we might lose time. We didn't lose any time because of snow. There wasn't any snow. We lost time because of wind. We were actually
yes,
shut down.
This scene was meant to be shot with, it was just impossible. It was about 100 miles an hour of wind that day. Also we shot this on a stage because of the construction, the design of this, and also shooting with a wolf, where the wolves are the opposite of dogs. They are completely wild animals and very, very difficult to control. So even that small scene there was very challenging. We surprised Hugh Jackman. We put a camera here for the last take of this. It was his birthday when we shot that, and we came out and the entire crew had evacuated the stage.
Neanderthals. We once believed that they were wiped out by years of conflict with a much more...
This is really just a big empty room that's used for conventions and various. I believe there was a show of erotica there just before we were there, and we turned it into a museum. Guy Dias and Brian sort of designed a whole kind of science center, and all of these exhibits were brought in and placed, and this entire basic set was just an empty shell until we dressed it.
But it's fun. We were able to add things like a saber-toothed cat, which is obviously a nod to the first film, and also other little subtle things. There was one outtake, which I think will be on this DVD, which it's a lovely scene with Jubilee.
Even the architecture is kind of a nod to the first one, where if you look in the wider shots, you'll see the sort of X frames that look very much like the place where Magneto and Professor X had their first confrontation.
It's interesting. The day we shot this was the day I decided formally that I was going to kill Jean Grey. So I asked her sort of on the spot to take the scene into a different direction, and him as well, and then we kind of conceived this moment where dreams are getting worse and all these things sort of on the spot. And then after we shot the scene, I took her into the trailer, and shortly after, I think either that day or the next day, and told her what plans I had for her character. And she was actually very, very happy about that, because I think it gave her something more to play. Let me explain also a little about what you just saw with the flashing around. Originally, we shot that in a sort of step frame or step printing process, in which we shot it like 4 to 6 frames a second. But ultimately, in editing, we found that it was more fun to actually use the fast motion whip wipes and create some kind of sense of it that way. So instead of going for the that kind of strobed slow motion, the scene had more of a frenetic approach.
There's your X's. Look at that, X's everywhere.
This is the introduction of Pyro, played by Aaron Stanford, who I had seen in the film Tadpole, and I thought he was pretty tremendous. The characters, I just cast obviously the characters from the previous film.
Aaron brought a great energy to that part, very different than we'd had before.
Yeah, he sort of played the darker edge to the character, which ended up really selling, and I was really pleased to be able to sell his evolution, his arc, where he ends up leaving with Magneto, which I wasn't sure whether you have all these different ideas that you want to explore in a movie, different characters, and very often you don't always get to. Sometimes they just get lost in the shuffle, or they're not completable. You have to focus on the central story. So that was one that I was glad was able to pay off.
Here we had to take this set down almost to absolute zero to freeze these people, and then bring them back to life right after the scene was shot, which required a lot of safety.
Now, these are all... Lee Cleary, my assistant director, is really brilliant, basically said, you're going to need mimes to do this scene, at least for the people surrounding the principal character. So, although a lot of these are extras who are basically standing still, we also had a bunch of professional mimes, like this gentleman, who could surround the actors for tight close-ups, things like that. And they really work fantastically. I mean, obviously there are takes that the people are moving in, but we had enough to choose from. And it was done all very spontaneously, like running around, okay, everyone freeze, and then we'd run around with a Steadicam, and everyone, unfreeze! There you go. That's a shot from X-Men 1, because we were so cheap, we couldn't build a new sign for X-Men 2.
You told me it was an homage.
Yeah. Yeah, contrary to the appearances, we still operate under a relatively strict budget. But yes, it does expand over the sequels. This is one of the earlier scenes. One of the first scenes we shot, second days of shooting, I think.
Yeah, yep, day 2.
This is when I told Patrick, I said, in this movie I want him to speak faster. And he was like, wow, what? And then he did it really, really fast at one point, just to sort of show me up. And I was like, well, that's perfect. So I think that's the take.
Yeah.
What do you need, William? Just your authorization.
Again, this is probably one of the more detailed Oval Office sets that have been built. You find that sets like for the West Wing and things like that, which is like my favorite show, are not necessarily usable for film. They kind of break apart when you take them off the small screen. This is the introduction of William Stryker and Mystique, for those of you in the audience that actually thought that we had forgotten that Senator Kelly died in the first film and that this was Senator Kelly. It's not. Yes, there are people who thought that. But I had seen Brian Cox in Manhunter growing up and was a fan of his work all the way through LIE, which I thought he was fantastic in. And I'd seen him in a play, and we'd had dinner some years ago. Oddly enough, I was introduced to him by the same person who introduced me to Kevin Spacey many years ago, Gregory Cook, an actor friend of ours. And I had always wanted to work with him, and I was very stubborn about it. And he came in with a Southern accent the day of shooting, and I said, hey, why not? You know, it's the same thing happened with Benicio. They come in with a funny accent, you're like, oh,
It's
sure.
now a legend.
So, but it was very helpful, I think, to define him and differentiate him, because he's actually a Scottish actor. Differentiate him from Xavier and Magneto, who have these sort of mid-Atlantic accents.
It gave him a little texture, a little culture.
This is our new favorite toy, the Fraser lens. It's not that new, but we tend to...
We pretend it's new every time we use it.
Yeah, let's use that new.
Let's use that new thing.
If we'd been allowed to do our jobs, Mr.
I was all panicked because that picture in the background was black, when in reality it was just a dark, not very well-lit painting. This is Cotter Smith, who looks, yes, a little Bush-like, but I do believe that when you make a film during a certain presidency, you tend to emulate the look of the current president. It just is the way, it's just the way you cast. It's just always that way. This is
Yeah, Kelly Hu is another new character, playing Lady Deathstrike. And that was her introduction we saw earlier, where she's cracking her knuckles. It sort of presages what you're going to see her do with Wolverine towards the end, when we discover the real complexities of her character.
What's fun is with Lee Cleary, my AD, again, off screen, whenever she cracked her fingers, he would take a plastic water bottle and go... So for the
sound effects.
Yeah, which was really outrageous and very funny every time. Actually, probably a lot funnier. I just think it might not have been believable if we left that on the soundtrack.
She also has only one line of dialogue, and for some reason I got into practicing her line of dialogue before every shot she did, so that she really knew that one line very well by the time it came.
I know. Well, she got the same torture Rebecca had on the first picture. She got one line on the first picture.
And look at her now.
This is Flea and Colossus. Colossus, my casting director, Roger Musundan, saw him in a gym. He is 21 years old and 6'8", and recruited him.
When he saw him in the gym, did he have any aspirations to act? Or?
I don't know.
I thought he.
I think he thought about it.
Right.
He did have a resume, yeah, but that's not. He didn't come in for a general call or anything.
Well, I think we'll be seeing him again.
Yeah, he's a very unique presence and a really nice guy. The entire cast is probably the nicest group of actors one could work with, and very analogous to our usual suspects experience in terms of camaraderie and ensemble.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing to have this many actors, this many different personalities on a set, and actually not have any single one where you're like, oh God, we have to work with him today.
Mm-hmm. The hairstyle on Hallie's wig got a lot of criticism on the first picture. So sat in a hotel room with Hallie for half a day going through different hairstyles and wig styles. It's hard, with the white hair on an African-American woman. And ultimately, Hallie, I remember I kept looking to other people, and Hallie just looked me in the eye and said, "It's your decision." And I'm like, well, women's wigs are not things that I pick out on a general daily basis, so I said, you got to give me a little slack here. But I ultimately felt that was a better direction this time around.
And as always, the story of my life, one of the most beautiful women in the world, I get to photograph with a white wig.
Yeah, well.
And Jimmy Marsden with no eyes.
Jimmy Marsden with no eyes. Jimmy, who's
cheek acting.
One of the funniest actor. He is an impressionist I rate on the same level as Kevin Spacey and Kevin Pollak, who are both pretty brilliant impressionists. He's incredibly funny, and unfortunately in these X-Men films, he gets too little to do. This is a little, I wanted to have the Once and Future King in there for both obvious and less obvious reasons. Obviously, because he was once and hopes to be the future king of his domain. The other reason is because it's a...
Great book.
Well,
my favorite as a kid.
Yeah, and it's all about kind of evolution. You know, your destiny is not necessarily... Things evolve...
Or devolution.
Well, at one point...
Merlin.
Merlin turns him into a fish at one point.
Well, Merlin starts at death and works his way towards his birth, and he can never remember what has happened to him, but he knows everything that's going to happen. Yes,
and that plays into sort of our some cyclical things and some things that occur at the end of the picture. This was
key story point here.
Yes, the ingestion of Stryker's evil fluid spawned from the spine of his son. This is basically the old set pulled out of storage, the old plastic set. I think. I don't think we I think this is one of the few things we didn't throw out.
It was, we had
I think.
This was Guy Dias, our production designer. This was his first feature film. And it's a testament to, he did an incredibly brilliant job.
Well, these initial sets were John Mayer designs from the first film, but ultimately, and he was incredibly faithful, and yet found unique and different ways of doing them and building them so that it could be more adjustable, like this Cerebro set. You could...
Yeah, he made some technical improvements, but he also, John set a look for certain things that you couldn't really... Cerebro is Cerebro, and it's really been established, as was, the downstairs of the X Mansion, and Guy was very faithful to that, and really put his energy more into some of the newer sets and some of the...
or in reinventing ways to build
the
ones that already existed. Also, his task was much more daunting because not only did Guy have to... he had to almost build 5 times as many sets for maybe,
just a little bit more
money,
but not much.
The way we do Cerebro, you want to explain something about how all those...
Well, it's kind of hard to, these things are so complicated, it's hard to explain them as fast as they go by on screen, but Cerebro is a lot of different elements. There's actually only half of a Cerebro built, and we would move the walls around to the background depending on the angle that we would shoot. When they go to find the mutants or the humans, all of those people had to be photographed individually, and then they're composited with all of the computer-generated effects on top of them. So it's very, very laborious and time-consuming. But it's a pretty inspiring set when you're actually standing on that ramp and you're surrounded by, even though it's only a half of a sphere, but a half of a sphere, and you do get some feeling like you're in there. There's an incredible parabolic sound.
When you stand in the middle of Cerebro, you can hear your voice echo back to, or forced back to you from all angles. So it's completely a parabolic acoustic effect, depending on where you are. And then when it was revamped for Dark Cerebro, it had a different sound quality. By the way, inside Cerebro, when you see all those people, a lot of them are people we know. And you can't really distinguish one of them.
I'm afraid the results will be the same as before. We had a deal. The mind is not a box that can be simply unlocked and opened. It's a beehive with a million different
Spare me the
compartments.
lecture. I have no doubt that your amnesia, your adamantium skeleton, the claws are all somehow connected, but...
Logan, sometimes the mind needs to discover things for itself. I promise you we'll talk again when I return. Oh, if you will be kind enough to watch over the children tonight. Scott and I are going to visit an old friend.
I'm sending the coordinates of where the mutant seems to have settled for now. As soon as you find him, bring him back to the mansion.
Let's hope he cooperates.
Yes, for his sake.
The X-Jet was a set that Guy really ramped up from the first one, where we only had a tiny little part at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. By the way, this is when Senator Kelly turns into Mystique, because it's not really Senator Kelly, see? And this was stolen from an episode of The Twilight Zone, in which the devil is unleashed and walks past these pillars and slowly transforms into the devil, and I had seen that episode years ago, and I kind of used that as a sort of cheap technique to establish that Kelly was actually Mystique. And someone just came and sent me that episode for completely unrelated things the other day, and I watched it, and I was like, this is where... Anyway.
Big intro here. Mystique.
Yeah, that shot took 5 hours and was done with motion control, and ultimately the glass is added later, where she transforms behind it. And then this was a chance for us to again put in some more of our little
Friends'
cameo names. Well, no, these are more pieces of X lore. I enjoy very much putting putting in subtle X-Men. And if you freeze frame those, you'll see me and Tom DeSanto as security guards.
Which may have something to do with why he was able to break out.
Yeah. All of her eyes are digital, by the way. On the last movie, they were, Mystique was a lot of contact lenses. I remember she was in the helicopter kicking Senator Kelly in the last movie, and Bruce Davison, who plays Senator Kelly, wanted the glasses, her contacts out so she could see him, so we took them out, and then she went to kick him and kicked him right square in the face, knocked him off the seat, knocked his glasses off, and I swear if it wasn't a supermodel. He
might have been upset, but
yeah,
I think he found it actually somewhat erotic.
Oh yeah, big blue stain on his cheek. And for Rebecca, this was a lot more fun this time around. We got to have her, well, as you'll see soon, playing more than just her blue self.
The contacts were very irritating.
Yeah, so that's why this time around we did it all digitally, but I think they worked really well. You can't really tell.
And this is sort of...
I apologize for any slurping sound of our yummy vanilla ice blendeds.
From coffee.
From the coffee bean and tea leaf.
And if you pay attention
if you
now,
notice,
Kelly's line is coming up.
Oh, that's a gun. See, that's a plastic gun. But you didn't notice that she's going to use later.
Did you get it? That was her line.
Oh, I talked over it, I think.
Garbage.
And again, in the spirit of saving money, instead of doing any weird camera tricks, we just used twins. If you look, you'll see in the graffiti it says, "Nature laughs last," which is something that my friend Dylan Cussman, who appears in this film as well, once saw in graffiti on a wall and told me about, and I thought that really sums it all up. You know, we can say it, we can fight, we can protect the environment, save the earth, save humanity, save wildlife. In the end, it doesn't really matter because nature's going to be around a lot longer than we are. This was a real church in Vancouver, right near our hotel and right across the street from Tom Siegel's apartment. So you just rolled out of bed and came to work.
Barely. This is my favorite location. The only time I ever was able to go home for lunch on a movie.
And it didn't look like this. We dressed it to look like this, actually, and we had to be out of there because there was a
church service
like the next day. Now, what you can't hear on the soundtrack is me running around screaming at the pigeons trying to get them to fly. This was done live on the spot. We actually descended a stunt guy from the roof of the church, which was amazing. The church let us do that. I think our producer, Ralph Winter, had some pull with the church.
And Gary Jensen, our stunt coordinator, had to get his rig up there.
Yeah, Gary's really, really fantastic with things like decelerators and doing weird cabling work, and especially in weird locations. But what's great about it is you don't have to composite the character in. You actually have the real character falling in the real location, and all you do is rig removal. And as much of that as you can do as possible, the better, because then you're because things that are composited ultimately still, even with today's technology, often feel composited. And so if you can get away with using the real physical objects and just remove cables and wires, which no one ever knew were there in the first place, then it really sells believability.
He is testing me. And before you were in the White House, what do you remember?
Nothing. I was here.
Jean, I'd rather get him back to the professor.
This was a bad day for Alan Cumming because he had to go in about 9 hours of makeup to get those scars all over his body. Usually the scars are just covering his face. So he was not happy this day. But it makes for a cool scene and a cool moment, which I think pays off later between him and Hallie in the plane.
Another circle.
Yes, everything circles. Here's a circle here. These remember using public access. Yep. We did a shot like this of there's another circle. And I had a discussion with someone yesterday who complained about the fact that we were watching this dream in second person and we're not seeing it strictly from his point of view. But I think some of the imagery of Wolverine being cut open and particularly here going in the tank, running through the cave, which we see later, are potent enough where you really do need to see him in his dream. Now look at the exit sign in the background, something we were not able to remove from Royal Roads University, where we shot a lot of this stuff, so it plagues me.
President will address the nation.
for the White House assassin, following hundreds of... Can't sleep?
It's new legislation.
How can you tell?
Similar to the Mutant Registration Act.
Because you're awake.
Earlier this year.
Right. How about you?
I don't sleep. Science Museum are claiming to have experienced...
This is kind of interesting, this scene ultimately. Well, when it gets violent later, it was kind of interesting. Because it's kind of a very simple little fight, but I think because the audience was waiting so long for Wolverine to... like a movie and a half for Wolverine to really do his thing. Do his thing. That it got a lot of excitement from early audiences.
It's kind of a nice touch, too, like the idea of being able to use your power in a sort of practical way, as opposed to fighting crime or something.
And not just touching something, but...
Yeah. If you look closely at the guard bringing Patrick Stewart into the plastic prison, you'll notice he's a little shy. It's none other than...
Yes, that's me. But this cameo was not done out of narcissism, I assure you. We actually did not have a player that day, and there was a failed attempt at a cameo in the first X-Men in which I was to be a security guard, so I basically dug up my old uniform, which actually still fit and was still in wardrobe. And I did it.
Just like you did with Patrick.
And I was also, that's my second cameo with Patrick Stewart, because I was in, I'm in Star Trek Nemesis for 19 frames. Which was for me actually an amazing thrill because I'm a huge Trekkie.
Did they let you fly it?
No, but they let me stand at the controls and pretend to hit buttons, which is basically what I do.
Best.
In earlier drafts of the script, Xavier and Magneto never met, and it was always an issue, but there was always never a chance to get them together, and through a number of ideas that came from a number of different places. I think one idea came from Mike Hendrickson from 20th Century Fox, actually. I could be wrong, but part of this idea, if not the origins of it, came from him, and ultimately evolved into one of my favorite scenes, which is kind of a vague scene that kind of crisscrosses their paths, their histories, their friendship, and it is a moment that I think the audience likes, really waits to see, and is essential, is these two old friends cut from the same cloth with very different points of view about humanity and mutant kind and the relationship with one another actually together, discussing Wolverine in vague terms, discussing Stryker, and ultimately betrayal. And it's cut against this scene. Now, this scene was spawned from a scene that evolved later, which was a scene to have Iceman kind of come out to his family as a mutant. And then we went back and did this scene, which established that Iceman's family doesn't know that he's there, and it also helps explain the universe, that some of these kids, their parents don't know that they're going to school for mutants.
Eric, what have you done? I'm sorry, Charles.
I'll just be honest with this. I love the design of the prison in Silence of the Lambs, and one of my favorite moments is when the camera drifts up to those holes in the plastic, when Hannibal Lecter is smelling Agent Starling, and to have gas come through these holes, it just sort of takes that concept a step visually further for me, but it definitely is part of the inspiration for that. And I love these two men, again, trapped in this predicament. And then out comes the gun.
The scene here was a chance for Jimmy to do a little something more than he's had to do in the past, where he actually got to be proactive in a fight, and it was also a way to sort of start to establish the the stakes for these characters. Otherwise, he would have been sort of left sitting there watching Professor X get taken away.
But now and then, every mother needs to get away. Without her, the babies are helpless. Sensing danger, the mother rat races home. The babies can't even see the killer. And someone uninvited is coming to dinner. She arrives too late for one baby. The centipede was deadly. Hi.
It's just great, too, the innocence of the kid, just the way he looks up at the soldier, like... Because, and the rationale, I remember talking about it, was that he could be another mutant like anybody else. Mm-hmm. And it's like...
These are little ways of close-ups, just trying to set, without going overboard, but his sense of He just has an extra sense of hearing. He's not necessarily bionic, but trying to take all those ideas.
Heightened
This
sense.
was on the spur of the moment, by the way, this scene. Originally, she was going to get up and start running through walls, but that morning I said, can she drop through the bed? And everyone scratched their heads and said, well, give us an hour. And then they had to rig the pillow, and then Gary Jensen had to figure out a way to do it with the rig, and ultimately, so it shows that even scenes, complex scenes, if you have a moment where you want to do something, you just got to do it, and talented people will figure out a way of doing it. And this was a little scary with all these squibs going off. And again, this is that scene that just, I think, that was very funny. Shoots the girl. Where the audience had been waiting 1.5 movies for this.
And yet you did have certain violence restrictions.
Well, yeah, the scene, you'll see it in outtake. I like this full-on roar, and it was just too intense, so for ratings, I had to kind of break it up by cutting back to Bobby, but ultimately it was a very Wolverine classic Frank Miller moment that unfortunately I had to cut into and go back to reaction to Bobby because of ratings issues and intensity issues. While this, on the other hand, somehow made it into the cut. Although the sound, they took the sound down a little bit. It was a little severe. This is what it is.
Another new character.
Daniel Cudmore, again, is the actor. That's 6'8", and he is, we tracked him and then laid the metal effect over his body. I'd like to do some more with his character, perhaps, in the future.
It's another one of those tough things where theoretically all the lights should be off, and yet you want to see what's going on, and they're all running around in the middle of the night.
Yeah, ultimately, they would probably cut the power in the school, but you have to sort of take some measure of license, and instead we use the xenons, both on the
Helicopter.
to mimic the helicopter lights, and also on the actual helicopters used, and then also these lights that were, how much did they cost, Tom? On the guns?
Yeah, we built a bunch of, spent about $2,000 on flashlights.
Each.
Yeah.
That they're situated on top of the guns to create, but they end up defining the.
It became one of our major light sources. You can sort of see them there, and you'll see them a lot whenever you have the soldiers. And it's a particular light that, with a little bit of atmosphere, it gives you a nice sharp beam.
Here's one.
There you go.
Also, with the helicopters, I wanted these blue lights put on the helicopters to distinguish them from just ordinary helicopters. I sort of took that from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. These kind of track lights that were used on the helicopters in the final sequence. And then this is the Stryker's helicopter, which isn't quite, it's called a Vertol, which is quite amazing. They brought it to the office once and set it down, and then did a vertical takeoff, extreme vertical takeoff, and the thing launches up 500 feet in the air in seconds. I'd never seen anything like it. And neither had Ron Bleck, our Special Forces advisor, who was in Mogadishu, and he's a very active Special Forces guy, and he had never seen anything like it. And there again are the lights in action. And that's Hugh Jackman himself jumping off this balcony, which was one of the early stunts we did with him.
He's a great physical actor. I mean, he really will do just about anything, and comes out of theater and dance and musicals, and is extremely adept and eager physically. He put a lot of work into his physique and the physical part of the acting.
This is, again, a scene coming up that comes out of economic concerns. I wanted to create a great moment between Wolverine and his maker, essentially. And I thought a wall of ice would be a very simple economic way to do it. Originally, the idea was going to be simply that the atmosphere would start to become foggy, and eventually there would be a wall of ice there, and it wouldn't cost me anything. But then ultimately you find out that the only ice that's really going to look real is real ice, so we needed to bring in a 2-ton wall of real ice filled with primacord because it has to explode, which then started to melt. And then we required creating the ice wall, which, again, was more complicated visually than one expected.
The practical ice wall is one of the most beautiful images in the film. I mean, it's really spectacular.
And because of your lighting, because of the way, if you look, the way Stryker is silhouetted by the lights.
I mean, look at that.
And you'll watch him, and because you'll watch him dance, his silhouette will dance across the wall here, because it's actually being backlit by, see, it moves like that. And I could create this very Star Trek Wrath of Khan moment between these two. And it was only when I saw the silhouette that I realized this was possible. I didn't until all of a sudden there he was in silhouette, and that's when I asked Hugh to put his hand up and meet Stryker's hand. Basically at that moment, because I had no idea either would be silhouetted. I just, and again, that's those lights. And that's the real ice wall exploding from Primacord. It was interesting when we blew up the ice wall. There was so much Primacord used because it was so dense that we had to keep our mouths open on the set, because apparently when explosives go off nearby you, the pressure can build in your system and do damage. So if you're ever near explosives, always keep your mouth open. This is kind of a redesign of the X-Garage from the first film. This is an actual real garage that was modified. We put in some exotic cars and our Mazda RX-8, which is a kind of a cool car. Why don't you explain how this was done, in the spirit of economics?
This is, well, it's not only economics, but if you really think about it, they're driving through the woods at night, and what are you going to see out there? Really not much. So we actually did that on a stage with a lot of lights moving through greens and trees, and the occasional practical light outside the window going.
Yeah,
so.
See, when you see those white lights go by, they're actually little lights on a dolly track being pushed by guys.
But it's...
There they go.
Yeah.
I just think that stuff's so funny, how it actually really works.
And probably with more, feeling, and this is the kind of thing that had we actually gone out there and done it, it would have been less effective than what we have here. We really feel like you're driving through a sort of dark, wooded area.
Whoa. Sit back. Where are we going? Storm and Gene are in Boston. We'll head that way.
My parents live in Boston.
Good.
And if you see, now, there's a little lesser-known thing. When Stryker walks in, comes out of the elevator, you see a little white piece of strip on that door. It says danger, because that is the entrance to the danger room, which was built, taken down, and stored.
To be used later. Keep watching. All of these props had to be built, these special tools. And
Yeah, Jimmy Chow, our prop guy, is really clever with this stuff, and keeps it kind of a mix of interesting, futuristic, and yet a bit retro. Because I think something about the comic book, its origin in the 60s, I believe needs to be acknowledged in some way. Not in terms of camp or in terms of it being dated, but at the same time there's certain colors you'll notice even in the designs of the Underground Mansion, the pastels and things like that that evoke the sense of the period in which X-Men was created. I think it's nice to have that.
this was an actual anti-mutant demonstration that we filmed.
Now, you will see something here besides beautiful Rebecca Romaine Stamos playing herself, but also all the foam in the beer is digitally created because it was never in continuity, and it was nobody's fault but mine. But it was distracting and bothersome to me, and since got a lot of visual effects going in the movie, why not clean up the foam? So that's digital foam. And I guarantee
Which
you
tastes like crap.
Virgin foam.
Some people's favorite shot in the movie.
Again, the snorkel lens. A couple of aspirin. A seedy restroom. Apparently some friend of mine with children took their kids to see the film and got very uncomfortable. Oh no, Stephen Sommers, who directed Van Helsing, was watching the film with his 70-some-year-old mother and his 3-year-old daughter. And I said, we play in a lot of quadrants, but you're really pushing the envelope there.
One of them is too young to have ever had a scene like this, and the other one's too old to remember it.
Oh, we have another blooper that you probably will not be seeing on the DVD.
Yes.
We did a lot of humorous little bloopers making the film. We actually did have a lot of fun doing this film, and did a lot of goofy stuff. Some of it was a little mature, and some of it, you will see.
It was just in plain bad taste.
So this is early scenes in Stryker's underground base. You want to talk about how that was constructed?
This is a real testament to Guy Dias, too, because this first set we're looking at, which is the cell where they're holding Xavier, I think it's one of the most beautiful sets we have, and it's very small, very simple, but it's just in the things like the scenicking, the shapes, the curves, the textures, and Stryker's base was not unlike the bottom of the mansion, was designed really to as much as possible emulate the notion of practical lighting, where Guy and I, with Brian's approval, built all of the practical lights into the set, so they were actually part of the set, and then we would have them all on a dimmer board and turn them off or on depending on the particular shot or the particular scene. So there's actually a very minimal amount of on-the-floor lighting to create this look, and I think it's a really beautiful look. We worked really hard to establish some colors for the Stryker's base, in part to sort of give a signature to Stryker, but also in part because there's a little bit of confusion with real Cerebro and the illusion of Cerebro and everything, so that the audience would sort of know when they're in the base and when they're in different parts of the base, because there's a lot of complicated parallel action and running around.
We built the structure in an old Sears warehouse, which we outfitted to be, I believe, one of the largest sound stages in North America now. The set was enormous and involved over 60 miles of cable and enough
You needed a
wattage.
bicycle to go to the bathroom. It's literally, if somebody had to go to the bathroom during a scene, they would jump on a bike and have to go about a quarter of a mile to the other end of the set to go to the restroom.
The best one is when you drove your rent-a-car through the soundstage and pulled right up to set. And I was like,
I always
okay.
wanted a really privileged parking spot, and I thought, this is the first stage where I can actually just drive my car right onto the set.
Allow me to introduce Mutant 143.
Now, this man in the wheelchair playing Stryker's son is Michael Reed McKay, who I had already worked with. He played an emaciated concentration camp victim in a shower scene in Apt Pupil. He was also the body of the near-dead victim in the movie Seven. And he's a really great guy and wonderful to work with and incredibly tolerant of difficult physical positions like the one he's in at this moment.
Which looks simple, but he's actually being sort of jammed forward. He's got a thing stuck into the back of his neck. And
Yeah, there's a scene in
contacts
Outtakes which is fun where he actually stands up and takes the halo off Patrick's head and you see the stuff pour out of his neck.
Meanwhile, at the Drakes.
This is our Mort Cleaver scene. And this scene, originally they were going to go, in the early drafts, they were going to go back to a Rogue's family's house, but geographically getting them to Mississippi made no sense. So it became Bobby Drake's family, and I think ultimately evolved into a character story like Pyro's, like the flip side of Pyro's story, where Iceman becomes a strong character and ultimately an X-Men. That's my favorite moment. Hello?
This is Wolverine's bout with technology.
Yeah, things frustrate him. The jet, when it moves, he gets very agitated, airsick. The phone, he gets certain things. Automobiles, he's good with.
He's a man of direct action.
And this draws a little parallel between, and starts Iceman's story and sort of Pyro's desire for the family
he never had.
He doesn't have. And
Sex in a time of AIDS.
Don't get too close. You never know what you'll catch.
Actually, this is more like sex in the time of SARS.
Again, in the original comic, there wasn't Professor Xavier's School for the Gifted was more of a group of X-Men in an X-Mansion, but I decided early on to have the students, and that enables these kind of characters to emerge in future films. This is Wolverine's search for beer.
A never-ending quest.
I was obsessed with the cat. And maybe it's because I wanted to get revenge on shooting with the cats in Apt Pupil, but I was obsessed with having this cat in the movie and having it lick the claws and lick the frozen tea, and even though it screwed our schedule up,
But it's one of the great, that licking of the claws. One of the
it
great
ended up being a fun
comic
line
moments
and
of the...
punctuating our trailer. And this story starts the more human side of our X-Men film.
You're clear. Have a nice sleep, Lyncher?
There's something different about him, Mr. Lorio.
Yeah, I was having a good day.
No. No, it's not that.
Sit down.
No.
Sit your ass down.
What could it be?
What are you doing?
Yeah, Ty, the actor who plays the guard, actually gained like 40 pounds to play this role, which was very cool of him. But oddly enough, the name tag was on the wrong side since we had to flip that shot, so the name tag's actually CGI as well as all this blood and metal.
We did try practically pulling metal out of him, but it just stayed inside. He's now filled with iron, which is part of why he weighs so much.
This scene began, I had an idea where I wanted Magneto to draw this iron that Mystique had injected in him out of his body, turn it into one ball, and having the one ball slice apart the prison, and then he was going to grab hold of the ball and it would carry him across the chasm. Because having characters fly arbitrarily is bothersome to me. Ultimately, we went with 3 balls because it enabled 2 to be used as weapons and 1 to be used as a disc. It was far more elegant to have Ian step onto a flat disc of metal than it was to have him dangling from one of them.
So, when did you first know you were
A mutant?
And again, placing Wolverine in environments where he's uncomfortable has become a wonderful tool in these films. In the first one, I basically took a cynical point of view to the names of all the X-Men and their characters and had him come in and say, Storm, Sabretooth, are you people? What do they call you, Wheels? Which is a line, actually, that Hugh wrote himself. In this picture, taking it a step further and throwing him in Middle America with a family and a bunch of kids and away from Jean, who he loves, and away from the man who's the key to his past, and he couldn't feel more trapped. And I thought, that's kind of the essence that makes his character evolve. This is also sort of the angry, jealous, and confused little brother syndrome, punctuated by my cat. It's not my cat.
Cinematic.
And this, scene's sort of an allegory of the classic coming out to your parents scene. Except in this case it goes terribly, terribly, terribly wrong.
The newly improved X-Jet.
Nobody's responding. I can't get a signal.
In the first movie we had, like one little scene in it.
Yeah, a much smaller plane.
Here we had pages and pages, so thank God that guy designed a much more significant set here.
Again, you'll notice in all the sets a lot of incorporative lighting. I personally am a big fan of the sort of Kubrickian style of source lighting as opposed to conventional stage lighting, and Tom and Guy work really well together in having the light sources be seemingly natural, and even worrying a lot about reflections in eyes, for instance, making sure that you aren't always seeing the crew.
And this was an example of this, a very intimate scene between Nightcrawler and Storm, and it was one where we tried to use the practical lighting to kind of shed light on him and yet keep him a little in shadow, keep him a little mysterious, because she's just sort of trying to figure out who he is and get to know him, and we didn't want it all to be just right out there and obvious yet, so you kind of see these tattoos and this strange configuration as he leans towards the light, and then he'll lean away from it, and then you're in shadow, and so it's not just all out there. You have to kind of discover him a little bit, just like she's trying to discover him.
The fun part about some of these sets are, as well, that there's a lot of little detail, little things written on walls and panels. Like on that back panels. You never go back there because it's basically a flat, but it says, instead of SUV, I think it says XUV, like that kind of stuff.
And her white hair is, of course, a lighting nightmare, because when you have a scene like this where you're cutting back and forth between behind her and in front of her, and that white needs to always sort of be the same color, you're really in for it.
Where?
The Drake house.
Oh, okay. It's for me.
Ollie. Have you tried not being a mutant?
No one's left, Jean. Soldiers came.
The scene was shot in a little community outside of Vancouver. We sort of took over a cul-de-sac in the neighborhood. And the neighbors next door are real sweet. They made a little sign saying, "Welcome, cast and crew of X-Men," and they hung out, and the little girl next door ended up canceling her trip abroad to watch us shoot. So I brought him in a couple of times to watch.
Which can be really boring. I mean, if you've ever actually been on a movie set, after the first 20 minutes, it gets really boring. But these people got a show.
Yeah, they got to be in it. The
They
mom
got to
had
be
the
in it,
cameo
and
everything.
you're about to watch why they got to see a real show.
Well, yeah. Normally there's a lot of talk and a lot of waiting, but in this case,
We got to blow things up.
and you're gonna see a moment actually coming up pretty soon. We with our first stunt. This is kind of those scary moments. The woman who's got her gun trained on Wolverine.
The rest of you, on the ground now.
That police one?
Yeah, this one.
On the ground.
Here, she actually gets hit by fire, and then she rolls backwards and really landed on her head and went unconscious for a moment. Of course, this was the first stunt we did on the show, and I was freaking out. But then she's fine, and then the next day she was our fighter jet pilot. And again, another guy got engulfed by fire, and and arms heated up. But then you'll see him here. He doesn't get pulled out quite fast enough. Not these gentlemen. That's artificial fire right here. Bang, and then whoop, he gets yanked out. But again, he's back the next day. I mean, these guys are pros. That's the car sort of spinning around. Now, this was you, Tom, inside of a police car.
And that car lands right next to the
Yeah,
camera.
that
Wasn't
was-
supposed to do that.
Yeah, it was supposed to blow up out of the way, but the stunt woman, Melissa, she turned out of the way fast enough to avoid the car with a live cannon in it coming down and landing right on top of you guys, which was...
I remember that because when I got out of the car, everybody was all freaked out. But when you're shooting it, it's like there's this... When you're looking through the camera, there's this kind of... feeling of invulnerability that is completely artificial. And you're just looking through and oh, there comes a car crashing down right in front of me. Cool. Because you don't realize... Because it's all through this glass, through this square.
I did the same thing. I was
no big deal.
shooting a commercial in a helicopter, and we were crabbing over the ocean at 10 feet off the water at 60 miles an hour, following a yacht, and I'm staring at the monitor, forgetting that I'm actually in this
Inches away from
fucking
crashing.
helicopter. So this we had a helicopter. We had a twin star helicopter come down into the street to create the wind, so there would be some interactive wash coming on those trees, and then we obviously put the jet in and removed the big fans.
That's because we couldn't actually land
and
the jet there.
helicopter. Yeah,
We wanted to, but there's a lot of permit restrictions, so we could only fly the X-Jet in certain places.
You can land jets horizontally, just not vertically.
We used to take the X-Jet out on the weekends a lot, remember? Take it out for spins.
Yeah, I want to be paid an X-Jet time. Next show. And this was, again, separation of the family and the introduction of Nightcrawler to this group. Sometimes you forget when you're juggling so many characters, they're all crossing each other's paths, and you're trying to establish them and make them interesting, humorous, but most importantly, believable. And again, this is, instead of having the jet take off and spending the money on that, we just play it in a close-up on Bobby, and you get more emotion out of it and save about $100,000. This is nice. Unfortunately, originally the scene, he actually uses his power to breach the controls of the Halo and get and be released by Mutant 143. But it was actually so convincing to the audience, they actually thought that he did escape, and unfortunately it confused people. So I cut it, but it's on the DVD, I think. I'll see a little scene I'm proud of. So instead, we launched straight into what's clearly an illusion. If you'll notice the eye color on these, on the girl, whenever we shoot with contacts, we always, even though we're shooting with contact lenses, we have to go in digitally and remove the edges of the contact lens so that they don't look like contact lenses, so they're seamless. See, there's a rule, you're not supposed to swear around kids when you're working, and every once in a while, you're working and you say the wrong things, and I remember anytime someone would swear, the little girl, she would charge us $5. So I think I ended
very wealthy.
Yeah, on the set. And again, this is the woman who was the cop is also the female fighter pilot speaking through the radio. And apparently, we did a little research and found that we're the first American movie to put a woman in an American fighter aircraft in a movie.
I wonder why.
Even if it's not a real F-16.
Repeat, lower your altitude to 20,000 feet. This is your last warning.
It's funny, when I choose aircraft, I don't always go for the most sophisticated and the most current aircraft. It's like the choice of automobiles in The Usual Suspects. I try to find things that will ultimately be more classic and place the film not in any specific time or or overly contemporize the film. To me, that's more important. So I'll juggle up, we'll use Hueys instead of Blackhawks in terms of the helicopters, because Hueys are actually more traditional and Blackhawks are more of this moment, are more contemporary. And likewise with the planes, we use these classic, the more classic fighter jets, as opposed to things that are more of the moment of Gulf War II or of Afghanistan or things like that. To achieve this scene, we basically had a giant, very aggressive gimbal, where we put half the X-Jet, the front half of it, on the gimbal. So anything you see out down the back of the second half of the X-Jet on the interiors is replaced CG. That way we could create some real movement for these actors to experience. But the gimbal was so aggressive that they had to be strapped in, because if the actors weren't, they could be killed. It's that intense. And then when in fact the jet opens up, we hit them with about 120 miles an hour of air. So then it became a struggle to keep Hallie's wig on her head. Because these are not Stryker's men chasing them, they're Stryker's, agents of the villain. They're actually just soldiers out on patrol in their fighter planes, scrambled to intercept a plane. I enjoyed showing them ejecting and surviving, because I felt that, like the police in front of the Drake house, they were simply law enforcement people on call. I don't think they should be victims of the X-Men. When you get into Stryker's lair and Stryker's soldiers, even though they're kind of victims of circumstance, their actions are more villainous, and I felt more comfortable in having them be casualties. This scene, was designed to show Jean's expanding power, so her evolution begins here with the first missile. But there's still a deficiency. She's still not strong enough, and the final missile gets him.
And here's where you can really see that gimbal at work. Mm-hmm. The kind of physicality you get from the actors, you can't just get from moving the camera.
That's really Anna Paquin getting sucked out of the plane. She's doing all her own wire work there, and then it's comped in.
Her own free diving.
And the scene began, actually the original idea came from a commercial that Zach Penn showed me that involved a plane that, a car that gets blown apart and then reassembled as a newer model, and that kind of was the impetus for this idea. The plane getting reconstructed and Magneto saving the X-Men, but only for his own selfish reasons. That's the reason I kind of accepted the tagline X-Men United, because they are united with Magneto, but it's an unholy alliance, and I felt that, if it was too much on the nose, it would be kind of boring, but the fact that it has a kind of rhetorical implication. Originally I wanted to have the tail there, but it cost too much.
Want to say anything about his makeup? About how you got his...
Well, his makeup came from enormous amounts of tests, and eventually those are actually angelic symbols. Sort of an offshoot of early Christianity. And it came from trying to add some dimension to his face. Ultimately, these films, there will be at some point CG characters, but for these characters, it's nice when you cast really fine actors like Alan Cumming to actually let some of the character of the actor come through, and you can do that, and sometimes just simple makeup, even though it isn't so simple. It still takes Rebecca about 9 or 6 hours to do her makeup, and Alan about...
It's simple compared to CGI.
It's simple crafting a character in the computer, which is difficult.
Remember? Mr. Stryker has powerful methods of persuasion, even against a mutant as strong as Charles.
The scene was shot out in the woods near Stanley Park over a couple of long nights. And it was nice, though, because we had all the actors together, even though it's a night shoot. Night shoot outdoors can get a little tiring, particularly around the final hours. And then just when everyone's really exhausted, you're fighting the sun, which is coming up. And so you find yourself accelerating as the evening is coming to an end.
Especially when you only have like a few nights, because then you have to get into a night rhythm and then right back into a day rhythm.
We didn't shoot as much nights on this film because we did a lot of interior stage work, so that means we could shoot during the day.
It wasn't bad.
The first film was like a month of nights. This one was only a couple of weeks, but they were sometimes interspersed, which really throws your schedule. And I like to spend about a couple hours in the editing room every night, which, combined with doing rewrites on Sundays and sometimes doing rewrites on set, in fact, more than sometimes, creates a a lot of fatigue.
You had to bring in that tree for him to hang on.
Yeah, we couldn't hang him from a real tree. So it's all these little things you got to do that people take for granted. They assume, oh yeah, just throw an X-Jet and a guy up in a tree and some tents.
Stryker said Alkali Lake.
That's where the professor sent me. There's nothing left.
I first saw Alan Cumming on the stage in Cabaret a number of years ago in New York and thought he was really terrific. Definitely had the German accent down pat, and then he'd done a number of films that I'd seen after that and always wanted to work with him. He wasn't available at first. We had looked at a number of other people, and then finally he became available, and I cast him. Originally in the scene, Wolverine and Jean Grey were not supposed to kiss. They were going to sort of talk about their relationship. And it occurred to me that morning that they never really had much of a relationship to talk about, and I felt that they really needed to act on it. They needed to start forging that relationship right there and then. So we actually shut down, and everyone sat around for like a couple hours while I kind of paced up and down across the clearing where we were shooting, and eventually said, they should just kiss. And then all of a sudden everything made sense right up into the final scene after she's gone. And what was nice is we played it all, for the most part, in one take. Well, until we cut. And Lauren suggested that my producer Lauren Schuller-Donner suggested that he'd be a little lighter in the scene, and so I gave him a little adjustment, and it was really nice. He just kind of showed the sweet side, and it was only after shooting this scene that I went back and watched Empire Strikes Back and saw a curiously similar scene, which I had forgotten about consciously, but must have remembered in my subconscious, where Princess Leia is helping fix the Millennium Falcon, and Han Solo tries to seduce her with his bashfulness. In the comic book, these two characters are related, Mystique and Nightcrawler. I don't want to get into that kind of complexity in soap opera. In the films, it's a little difficult to explore, so instead I do it in moments like this. Just give them a scene together, show their similarities, show their differences, and show that there is some kind of connection between them. To me, capturing the essence of the characters is every bit, if not more important, than worrying intensely about the lore. If the essence is there, Wolverine's search for his past, these relationships they have with one another, and their the physical nature of the characters as well, and the powers. I feel that their relationships, all the stuff from the comic book, will come in the subconscious, so to speak. I know that was a little overly philosophical. I better stick to the basics. Guy on girl.
This is pretty basic, with a twist.
Yeah, this scene was originally my attorney asked me if there was a way that I could get Hallie and Hugh to have sex in X-Men 2, and I said, well, they're not with each other in the picture. And I'm like, well, what about Rebecca? And I said, well, I don't think she's his type, Mystique, with all this. Well, can't she be anybody's type? And I said, well, that's true. And that's how this scene was born. And then eventually it was also about what Wolverine's real desires are of that moment.
Sex with Stryker.
I want you to get out.
Why don't we get uniforms?
Yeah, where's ours?
Also, this scene, originally the line was, I love what you've done with your hair, because in the first film it was Magneto's machine that caused her hair to have a white streak in it. But then Ian said, can we do it this way?
We love what you've done with your hair.
And I thought it was kind of funny, kind of catty. Again, Magneto and Mystique have some kind of relationship. We don't know what form she takes when they're together, but they do have some kind of relationship.
Stryker.
Want to talk about lighting, cooperative lighting?
Well, the X-Jet, not unlike...
Well, I'm talking about the fire more, like when we have blasts and fire and lightning and all these...
Well, yeah, when you're creating visual effects, and a lot of times when part of the visual effect is not actually going to be there when you're shooting practically, in other words, a lighter maybe moving across thin air or something like that, nonetheless, you have to take into account what would happen with the light. Like here, when he has the flame in his hand, there would be light given off from that flame, so it's important that we work with the visual effects team to provide that kind of interactive light, that when they then put in their CGI model or whatever element they're adding to it, that the interactive light is something that marries those two elements together and makes it more believable.
My favorite film is the film Jaws, and you'll notice I put little teeth, shark's teeth on the side of a Pyro's lighter as my sort of homage to that film. So one of my production companies called Bad Hat Harry, because there's a line in the film Jaws where he says, that's some bad hat, Harry. When John assembled this scene, he assembled it a little differently than I thought it would come out, and it ended up being quite funny to me. Watch this little... he's just typing. He's actually not really looking at the kids.
Yeah.
He's typing something in the computer, but it looks like he's torturing the kids.
That was kind of an interesting shot that we just had there, is when we actually... the shot where the camera starts above the X-Jet and comes down to show the 3D map, actually above that X-Jet was just set. And if you remember, one day we were just sort of fooling around in one take and we were on a crane and we just started up above, and it was actually photographing all the lights and stuff like that. And when you saw it, you thought, well, that's a cool idea, and then that gave you the idea of putting in the exterior above it.
But it also served a story device. It showed their proximity to the dam, which was very important for later in the picture. So by having done that on the set for fun, we ended up having a great device to show where the jet was in relationship with the dam, which plays into the end of the picture when the dam's coming down. This was funny when the chairman of the studio, I ran some scenes for him. He was up there in Vancouver. He saw this scene, this giant tunnel that Wolverine is in, and he said, "Where'd you shoot this?" And we said, well, we built it. He went, ugh.
With my money?
That's Dylan Cussman, by the way, an old friend of ours. He was in the movie Dead Poet Society, a really terrific actor and a writer, and he came up to do this for me. And
an originator of the line.
And originator of the line Nature Laughs Last, and also of the concept with Chris McQuarrie for The Usual Suspects. It was him and Chris that were talking about it online at Sundance when they thought, wouldn't it be neat to have a movie called The Usual Suspects with a poster of 5 guys in a lineup. This was quite a large part of the set. There were three sets of doors, all moving separately, and all these things were interconnected, and all these lights could be set up to operate at any time, as Tom was explaining earlier, that it enabled us to move from set to set much quicker and ultimately save more than it cost to build it.
This is also where you see a little bit of the color coding. You'll see how the hallways have kind of a moss green look to them, and the Cerebro has its color, and then the control room where they're looking at all the monitors has its color. So it was just a way to sort of help the audience a little bit as they run around these corridors and go from room to room, to give them some kind of geography about where we are. And you see here there's a little different color. And you go, oh, okay, I see what I mean.
Yeah, you notice Mystique giving the middle finger. She slides out. It was a little dark in the initial take, but since we already had to do some CG fixes, we were able to brighten up the profanity.
Can you override the spillway mechanism?
Everything's controlled from inside that room. That's why the doors are so thick.
Oh, really? Get some charges. Pull the doors open.
There's a lot of innuendo in the film, constantly, a lot of seductive and sexual innuendo. You know, she's good, you have no idea, you know, all these things playing on identity and people's relationships.
It's also another way to show that she's really good with computers.
Well, there's that. So we had Ron Blecker, who's our Special Forces advisor, which was a really great thing to have. He was actually in the real Black Hawk Down incident in the movie. Oh, this actor here, his name is Richard Burton. I love that. But it's really good to have somebody who can organize the troops and run them like troops. And although we do take certain cinematic license, there's certain things in terms of realism, the ways of handling weapons and equipment that these guys know. And I found it very helpful. Meanwhile, in Xavier's mind...
And this was a real challenge, to do something this layered and complex and yet have the audience understand it.
Where the hell we were at this moment. Well, again, key visual cues and Patrick playing it in a very ethereal manner helps convey this stuff. It is very taunting. You don't want to get overly complex with these things. Basically, the simplicity of a story, particularly a fantasy story, is very... is sometimes more significant. It's sort of the Star Wars formula. It's all, get the plans to the rebels, defeat the Empire. It's kind of simple. And here, when I try not to mire myself in complex storylines, and yet there are still things about illusion world and real world that I'm constantly juggling with. In these kinds of movies, screens always help a lot in defining geography and what's going on. Maps, holograms.
Can you shut it down from here? No.
Come, there's still time.
Not without us. Oh my god. The children. Kurt, will you come with me? Yes. Where are they? They're being held in a containment cell. We'll level down.
Striker.
Alright, we'll get the children and meet you at Cerebro. Okay, I'll try to find Scott and the professor. Will you be alright without us? Yeah, I'll be fine. Where's Logan? He's gone.
You, set up a perimeter.
Now, our second set, Dark Cerebro, was kind of the regular Cerebro that was aged and remodified. So we had the same structure, we were shooting in the same area, but it was completely revamped to show that Stryker had stolen key components from the panel, from the infrastructure, and then situated them in a makeshift device that he built himself in the base.
Jason.
And they're like Brian Cox wrote the line, time to bring it to an end. I felt that summed it up. And here we're jumping realities, you know. Xavier in his own mind, Xavier in the real room.
Is it time to find our friend?
143 as little girl, etc.
It was a nice opportunity, though, to be able to photograph Cerebro in so many different ways, different textures.
Yeah, in fact, lighting, I think, plays a key role in terms of knowing where we are, and we're constantly, when Cerebro is functioning, in the red lights and the white lights, in reality, in the fantasy, there was always, it was ever-changing, and when you're having so much drama take place in such a confined environment, lighting becomes the key set changer.
Just don't move.
Kill anyone who approaches.
It was nice to be back with John Ottman again in terms of editing, of course, and the scoring of the film. He maintained, you know, he was respectful of the first film, but yet elevated it to create a lot of really terrific themes. Do you want, since a lot of this is people running around and stuff, do you want to explain a little how we...
Yeah, the more something is visual effects dependent, the more that Brian and myself and storyboard artists will pre-visualize, because you need to know how all of the elements are going to fit together. But then you also have a kind of choreography like you're seeing in this sequence in the hallway with the confrontation between Jean Grey and Cyclops, where it's much more sort of kinetic physical action that doesn't require as many visual effects. And there, it's really... Brian and I think have evolved a style over 10 years of working, and it always starts with basic character, with what is happening with these people at this time, and that sort of is what dictates where you want to be with the camera at any moment, whose point of view you're telling the story from. One of the things that I think people looked for in X2 is an even bigger scale and bigger sort of epic quality to it than we were able to do in the first one, and for that we built a lot of sets, but we found one set that really served the story well, that we never could have reproduced, and this was an actual early 20th century generating dam, a hydroelectric power station that had been converted into a museum and still had all the turbines in there, and we were able to actually film in there and shoot a set which was on a scale that we never ever could have built. It was just enormous.
And it was funny because it was all painted bright colors and, make it conducive to a museum, and then Guy Dias aged the whole thing down so much that when the woman came back from her vacation and saw what he'd done to it, she thought he destroyed all their restoration they had taken 3 years to do, so she started to freak out and tremble and pick up the phone, and he had to hold her hand down and put the receiver down and say, "Please don't call anyone. We'll have it back the way it was in 3 weeks."
It's funny because we basically had to restore it to the way it really was. Where they'd spent years turning it into something
and
that
they didn't even know what it used to look like either. We got old history books to find out what the colors were, and then sort of fit them into our scheme. The scene where she's going up against Cyclops is under the control of Stryker through his drug, so he's got the dark circle in the back of his neck, and she sort of repels his blast as kind of the next stage in her evolving. in her evolving power, her awareness of things. I call this the Captain Nemo scene.
This is where the sub is
is going down.
Stryker's yellow submarine.
With Cerebro, the powers were not only more expanded but more delineated. His connection with people all around the world. These people are kind of gods in a way, and yet Xavier, by his nature, is constantly lassoing he and his students into humanity and trying to, defy their godness. And Magneto, on the other hand, has embraced it. When he says to Pyro, you're a god among insects. Never let anyone tell you different. This was a fun set. This was this augmentation lab, and as you may have noticed, the scratches from Wolverine, an essence of what had occurred here, his past. This was one of my favorite moments, is him confronted with his rebirth place. And I think a tremendous challenge of lighting.
I think this is probably my favorite set to light in the whole film. I mean, we had a lot of great sets, but this one just had so many opportunities for great angles and textures, and all of which spoke to his sort of angst and mystery.
And in spite of my bad neck, it had a lot of vertical qualities to it, a lot of height, so we could shoot in different perspectives. And when it came to choreographing the fight sequence, and really take the camera all over the place, and yet make it feel like it was like there were at every turn there was a nook and cranny that you hadn't seen before.
It's always a challenge on sets because rarely do you have a ceiling on a set, so you have more opportunities to light, and yet you always want to have these dynamic low angles that show the ceiling.
It's a funny moment when Hugh was running naked through that cave. The first take we did a practical joke and removed the walls off the back of the cave, so when he rounded the corner, all the women involved in the production were standing there waiting for him. And they went, woo!
He wasn't ashamed.
No,
they were very happy.
Yeah, he was quite, he's quite the
man.
Theater actor.
But you already know that. I used to think you
the autopsy table in the background behind Stryker was modeled after the one in Auschwitz. It's very eerie.
This is one of those great opportunities where you basically have, an action fight scene, but there's a lot of character in here and humor even, because this is the first time he's been kind of like, wow, maybe I'm not so unique, and I can't believe that there's something kind of like me.
Yeah, again, Wolverine in a predicament like, you've got to be kidding. Like, why am I here? How did I find myself in this mess? And that's sort of the reoccurring theme of Wolverine's journey. Just when he jumps out of a really hot frying pan, he's into the fire. This is done with a series. We used a number of things. I finally got to work with... I was a production assistant on a low-budget film called Street Trash, which was directed by Jim Muro, who has since then become one of the top Steadicam operators in the world, and he came in to do some fight sequence Steadicam work on this. So it was fun to finally work with him after many, many, many years.
There's a shot earlier where we have the camera all the way up in the ceiling. We come rushing down at the actors on a cable. And it's interesting because usually in those shots you can never make it come to a dead stop. So it kind of comes and then bounces. And ordinarily you would cut out that bounce, but John and Brian kept it in because it has a really much more kinetic feel, actually, when you see the camera kind of like flying back from the impact.
Yeah, John and I have had a history of using our mistakes. This scene had a much more vulgar incarnation earlier when she gets sort of punched in the crotch, or at least that's what it looked like, so we had to cut that for ratings issues. But another thing Jim Muro used, which is interesting, he is a mini Steadicam that weighs about 18 pounds and can move very, very quickly with the actors if they should turn and twist in ways that cameras normally can't move, provided you're shooting without sound, because the thing is very loud.
That's it. Oh, where do you think you're going?
One thing I promised Guy Dias I would do is shoot the full extent of the sets. Every angle, every cranny. So constantly, by the time I was done, I had to do this all the time. I try to, if I'm in a good location, I try to make sure the camera sees it all. You only have so much to work with, and you want to make sure it ends up on the screen and not, not off the edges.
And I mean, his sets were so great. You wanted to shoot every inch of it.
Yeah, and the detail was extraordinary, and the paint work was extraordinary. And this also, the original sound that was laid over this was just so brutal. I think it was knives into meat. It just got a little overboard, so we toned it down a bit. And then here's the moment where her eyes change from Stryker-controlled blue back to her ordinary brown, and you kind of realize that she was probably just some housewife that Stryker kidnapped and is now using for this evil...
But one of the great images right there.
It was kind of... This was very important to me when we were mixing the sound. I wanted it to be like clunk, and it never... The first two passes, they never got the sound effect right, and I kept saying no, it has to be like you've dropped one of your dumbbells in the bathtub and it lands on the floor. And they did it, and and that was sort of the concept, from the beginning that would, I think, be kind of sickly funny. I needed to find a way to get rid of all the soldiers in a quick, efficient manner, and Dan and Mike delivered this idea to me, and I will be forever grateful. Bye, soldiers.
Power of magnetism.
And once the set got blown up, there was no putting it back, so we had to be sure we had all we needed down that hallway. And this is where things get tricky, because a lot of characters' geographies, where they are at a given moment, are actually some of the most difficult challenges in trying to keep that all juggled so it makes some sense and some continuity. I think it's one of the most difficult tasks in terms of script development and shooting. And then juggling it all in the editing room. I do believe a film is written 3 times. Once on the page, once on the set, and finally in the editing room. And you really have to provide yourself with the best material that you can, but at the same time not be afraid to move things about. I think that was his last shot of the show. I think this was their last shot of the show.
Yeah.
Oh, no, actually theirs would be in Kananaskis. This is right near where they had the G8 summit a couple of years ago. And I asked for George W. Bush's room at the hotel. So they gave it to me, and it wasn't very nice, so I switched rooms.
Kananaskis is in Alberta.
Canadian Rockies.
Not that far from Calgary.
And again, this is Magneto's helmet. You have these devices, these costumes, and they from the comic, and they're not there just because that's what the characters wear in the comic. I believe, at least, you have to find some purpose for them. In the uniforms, whether it's when the darts hit Cyclops in the chest, you see they protect them, or the helmet to protect, as Magneto says, to protect him from the real bad guys. All these different costumes, dressing, and design need, for me at least, as a filmmaker, to have some kind of purpose. So I strive to sort of find that in developing a script.
And it's particularly hard in that when you have an ensemble of superheroes, because every one of them has different powers, every one of them has different capabilities, and so you always have to be sort of second guessing any scene you're writing or executing. It's for why didn't he just do whatever their particular power is, because so many of them can do so many things.
And this is something Dan and Mike brought to the story that was very significant to me personally. Is this reversal of Cerebro and the betrayal of Magneto, which ultimately enabled Magneto to be more, to continue and maintain his status as a villain, which I felt that there was no way I could have him simply be a good guy. There had to be some ulterior aspect to his character. Otherwise, he ceases to be Magneto and becomes, in the comic, for instance, when Magneto's wandering the Savage Lands with Xavier, that's a different story, and that's, this keeps him badass and cool. Originally, Wolverine was not going to drive his claws through Stryker, but I asked him to do it, and they were a little reticent to do it at first, but then I said, it'll give Brian Cox something to play. And then he said, and that made it. And when Hugh said, actually did the scene for the first time and said, how's it feel, bub? I really, that made it great, because he was sort of saying, how does it feel to have metal in you? Not so hot. Harks back to my favorite line in the first film, which is, when Rogue asks Wolverine, when they come out, does it hurt? And he says, every time. Again, this was shot actually later to establish some more geography. This is actually a model, or you're seeing parts of it. It's a massive model, about 60 feet long and 25, 30 feet high, that was built in Van Nuys of the dam. And I was, there when they shot the thing first coming down, and they dump about 10,000 gallons of water in about 2.5 seconds. And it all sort of washes out into the parking lot. And they pump it back up for take 2.
It's one of the funny things when we talk about miniatures. Sometimes they can be like that, 60 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And only miniature in relation to what a real dam
Yeah.
is.
Well, water. It's very difficult to do water.
Yeah. And one of the keys to doing really good visual effects is understanding the advantages and the limitations of CGI. So knowing when you're working in a 2D world or a 3D world, or a CGI world, or a
and to combine those
world.
as much as possible, combining miniatures with CGI, with real things, so that you're constantly being blurred. And Nightcrawler's tail is my favorite example, because there's many times when it's real and there's many times when it's not, and as long as you just keep it fluid. But yes, water has become the most challenging thing. Even Lord of the Rings, the scene in the second picture, was a template, and we needed to, look at that closely to see where water looked, where it looked real and where it looked miniature, and try to, improve upon that. That's an insert that was shot in London, I think, or no, L.A.
Yes, no, London.
Yeah, we didn't have many pickups. We had only about we don't call them reshoots. We call them pickups. Reshoots implied we didn't do it right the first time.
Right.
So I call them pickups, where we grab little bits and pieces we didn't have before, and we did that. We did about a few days, I think 2 in London and.
It is true. I mean, we didn't reshoot anything.
Oh, yeah.
We did a couple pickups for little sort of things like that to show how he got his hands out.
And then occasionally like a half a scene here or there, but ultimately, because you find with a lot of these big films, a lot of stuff does get flipped to the end, and they end up with weeks of pickups. And we not only don't have the money for that, we don't really have the time for it. So we try to shoot pretty economically. This scene came from when we were rehearsing it. We realized that James Marsden said, "I've never met this guy before. I mean, I don't even know who he is in the movie." And I'm like, "Well, you should ask him then, and you should answer the way you always answer. I am the Incredible Nightcrawler." And so that's how that moment came about.
It's a hard thing with an ensemble, is it's.
Well, you forget. You're like, wait a minute, these people haven't met, and you can take it for granted and say, well, they're X-Men. They're all mutants. They're all. But you can't say that. You have to really imagine that they're really in this world, and it's real, and to as much of a degree as you can. This was originally going to be a much more involved scene, but genuinely through trying to diminish the budget and put the money elsewhere, instead of creating a bunch of illusions and a bunch of elaborate stuff, I went for something more simple, and ultimately I'm very happy with it, very elegant, and using, again, lighting to create a cold, dead blue space for this girl to exist in. I think this was the day I had to pay her $5. The concept was that 143 is projecting images to in different ways to different people, so he can create illusions, but they're specific to different people's minds and the way they interpret things. The scene is interesting out there with Mystique. She was already on the Robert De Niro picture, and she had worked a very long day, got on a plane, flew up to the Canadian Rockies, was put into 6 hours of makeup, and then stood there practically naked in 15-degree weather, and then got right back on a plane, and not a single complaint. She is a princess and a fantastically tolerant woman. Rebecca Stamos. That's actually not the wash of the helicopter. That's actually wind that was coming across the lake, and we were waiting, and we shot so much film just to get the right moments so that we'd catch a moment of snow blowing up, of real wind blowing real snow, well, our snow that we brought in, up onto Pyro's face to match the helicopter wash.
The wind there was so strong. I mean, there was a day when you could literally stand on the edge of sort of a cliff and lean over the cliff, and the wind would hold you up. And
the park rangers made us leave the set at one point because there was a threat that trees would blow down on top of us. The idea here is sort of cold is breaking them out of it. And originally there was a scene where they were talking about hypothermia and how it affects the mind, and I never shot it, but it was kind of neat. There was an argument between Pyro and Iceman. And once the set is, it's funny, once the Cerebro set is dumped down, is aged, can't reverse it. Once it's iced, can't reverse it. So, we had to make sure we shot what we needed and then moved on to the next phase of shooting.
And that's, because you have to keep shooting. You have to always be thinking about, you can't just say, okay, now we're going to do a shot where it's all ice. And it says, okay, well, it's 6 hours for us to cover it all in ice. It's like, that all has to be planned out ahead of time.
This was kind of a sad moment. Originally, there was an extra shot of debris falling on top of poor Mutant 143, but I kind of cut it because I felt it was just insult to injury. Again, another victim of, another mutant victim of circumstance. This was also difficult. How do you move Patrick Stewart, who's meant to be in a wheelchair, through a set very quickly?
An action scene with a paraplegic.
Can't believe that worked.
Yeah, that's a real...
That shot was added way late in the process.
The water coming down the tunnel is a testament to some really good visual effects work, because that is really hard to
and done really quickly. He breathed in smoke there too. It was like when Stephen Baldwin got the lighter flicked in his eye in Usual Suspects, and he was choking on the smoke, and it made just those little moments are, important to use. This was also challenging to have all that water pressure up behind those doors on a set which could be easily destroyed by too much water. So again.
Fake and barely painted and get easily destroyed with
you get one shot at these things.
All artificial snow.
Yep. Originally they were going to come up and Stryker was going to be dead there, killed by Magneto, but we wanted to have another scene between Wolverine and Stryker where he kind of cuts loose his ties, his need for Stryker. So there was nothing there, but it created a nice form for all the X-Men to be standing there, a nice X-Men moment in the snow. And the decision was really, even though the film it takes place a lot at night in a lot of dark, confined locations, it was nice to be able to bring it out like this and actually use the great Northwest up in the Canadian Rockies. We've got these incredible environments, and it's so much of part of the Wolverine lore. To not take advantage of it would have been criminal. We built a piece of the X-Jet there, the leg of the X-Jet, and then extended some of it digitally. And then here's that moment. And it's nice, too, also to create frames with these characters, like that one, of the lone Wolverine with the boy standing, the trees. And you're not just getting trees, outside in the Los Angeles, Santa Monica Mountains. You're actually, you're getting trees very specific to, Western Canada.
It's okay, Rogue. It's okay. You can let go, honey. Let go. Rogue, we'll be fine.
Sure.
And when I was a film student at School of Visual Arts in New York, Wes Craven came and brought in some scenes from a film he was making, which was the first Nightmare on Elm Street film, and I never forgot. He explained that he put thousands of gallons of blood in a giant rotating room, shooting out of a bed, and the audience goes, "Oh!" And then he spent $13 on a latex tongue that pops out of a telephone receiver, and the audience flipped out. So you never know where the best, the biggest impact's going to come. So with Artie's tongue, it's a nice moment where it's kind of inspired by that, where he, we actually built a small latex tongue, and in the museum he sticks it out to the little girl. But when we came time to shoot it at the end, when he was sticking it out at Stryker, someone took the latex tongue and drove away with it, and it was with all the practical effects people in a motorcade of trucks on its way back to Vancouver. And I literally was like, get a helicopter to drop down on top of that truck and get that tongue. Ultimately, I think the CG tongue works just as well. This is also a moment where you realize nobody's asked where Pyro is, and they have to acknowledge it, and we're on the set, we're shooting, and I said, we gotta have this moment. So Wolverine simply asked the question, and Jean Grey has the awareness, and she answers it, and it's making sure that logic is maintained.
Oh no, we've lost the power.
It's coming. Come on.
Interesting, what's about to happen here, the Jean's sacrifice, something I decided to do during shooting, as I mentioned earlier, and told it to actually to Famke about a month after I made the decision, and we were able to keep it relatively secret by publishing drafts of the script with her surviving, always, and never actually creating any draft of the script except for 30 pages which were sent in separate envelopes of the actual ending to the studio, as private deliveries. So because there was never a script that existed with Jean's death, it just never became part of a conversation. And the few journalists that did know about it, who were on set, were really wonderful about keeping it confidential. And it managed to maintain its mystery and not be spoken about right up until release. We also did a stunt at the end. You'll see them all in the Oval Office together. We took photographs. We actually dressed Jean up in her full uniform and brought her into the Oval Office for some photographs that were done for trading cards and for other publicity purposes to dissuade the audience from thinking that she wasn't going to make it until the very end.
I think we shot it once, too, where she apologized to the president for being a little late.
For being late, yes. I think that might even be on this DVD. Is it? Yeah, you'll see that. Now...
She said she couldn't find a place to park the X-Jet.
And Wolverine's like, I saved a place over for you. So I'd like to be. And then she stoops down, because ultimately James Marsden is much shorter than anyone thinks, and we have him on always on stilts and risers, so that Wolverine doesn't appear so tall.
Famke is very tall.
Oh, that's true. Much taller than we realize. Now, there's a lot of people hassle me because they ask, well, why Storm doesn't create a funnel cloud and bring up the water, or Iceman doesn't stop it with ice, and ultimately, some of that is articulated here when Nightcrawler goes out to save her right here, and she won't let him. And it's also in the fact that it's just such a volume of water and such force, and there's such energy being exchanged that's not really what the scene's about. I mean, it's true Iceman says he can do a lot more than freeze a teacup, and ultimately he does. But this is, I always found or felt that this was something far beyond that. And then there's also the notion of her sacrifice, which is something that has that's more analogous to, let's say, what happens to Obi-Wan Kenobi, where he allows himself to be basically killed by Darth Vader and returns in a different, more inspirational form. I can't say it's identical to that, but it's more like that. She's in control of this action. She is there, to save them, and that is her purpose, and that is, and her sacrifice is part of that. But ultimately, as far as the Iceman and Storm of it all, there's just, there's just so much water that only her expanding power, only what she is becoming, is enough.
No!
It's interesting, a lot of, people talk about the gay allegory in the picture, and yet, an entire Christian audience is, I don't know what they're talking about. Clearly the message of this film is a Christian message. I mean, look at the evolution of Nightcrawler and the 23rd Psalm and all this. So the film has different meanings for different groups of people, I think, and that's part of the fun of of a film like this, and I think that's why, the X-Men universe has survived and been popular for 40 years, because it speaks to everyone on one level or another.
I mean, it's ultimately a plea for tolerance and an end to discrimination, and that's something that can apply to anything: religion, philosophy, sexuality, politics.
That's Dave Fabrizio, lead Secret Service guy, and also a friend of mine. Oh, that's the back of his head.
Good morning. Thank you.
That's Dave Fabrizio.
Mr. President, we're live in 5, 4, 3, 2.
My fellow Americans, in this time of adversity, we are being offered a moment to recognize a growing threat within our own population and take a unique role in the shape of human events.
Some people are confused by what Xavier's doing. Is he stopping time? And as you see when he freezes everyone in the museum, there's someone still on the cell phone. The TVs are still going. Here, when he freezes everyone, there's still life. Things are still happening. The X-Men get in, they get out, but ultimately, transmission of TV is shut off, which is indicated by the light going off and the system going down. And again, as was said earlier in the film, when they invade Stryker's base, there's some kind of electrical interference.
But isn't the power thing from Storm, though?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean.
Actually, it was from our dimmer board, but my electrical crew works very closely with Storm.
These are the mimes again. Those wacky mimes.
I love the one with the pen in his mouth. He looks like Steve Tobolowsky. That guy.
How did you get this?
Well, let's just say I know a little girl who can walk through walls.
You know, it's fun for an audience that isn't paying much attention. It's sort of, they kind of let it go that the mutants have sort of extraordinary powers to stop time or read thoughts or heal people. But if you are paying attention, they are quite articulated. You know, Xavier is psychic; he can control people. Storm controls the weather. Wolverine heals. Rogue can take your power. And here, what's nice is some of the younger characters that were introduced in the first film, Rogue and Bobby, kind of graduate in this scene and become X-Men, and finally have those uniforms they were asking about earlier in the picture. The death of Jean was nice here because it wasn't simply a repeat of the first film where, you know, there's a device, a doomsday, and the humanity saved, these kinds of things, but ultimately there was another dimension to what's happening, a loss, and now where Wolverine's search for his past was a genesis into a second film, perhaps this loss and its impact serves as a genesis into a third picture. So time hasn't actually stopped. What's happened is, since the people have stopped and the power was shut off, X-Men can get in, they can get out, and now everybody's released from their control and wondering what the hell happened. And if I was the president, I would be screaming, "Get me security! Launch the missiles!" That's actually a shot of Via Bamfy from X-Men 1. Again, we used because we didn't have the money to get new ones. It's funny, in these X-Men movies, we use like 5 different mansions per movie. Yeah. This scene came from a need I wanted to articulate, explore more about Jean's sacrifice, and ultimately, you know, give some sense of hope. And it was shot later we shot this in Shepperton Studios in London. Because Hugh Jackman was doing Van Helsing in Prague, and we couldn't get him out with the exception of one day. So we all flew to London to shoot this, and we had a really wonderful time. And we kind of rewrote the scene on the spot that morning, all of us together. So much so that Patrick Stewart took our final script page that we came up with, and we all signed it as a piece of commemorative history. And ultimately, I'm very, very happy with it. It's a warm scene, and I think gives us a sense of the future. Now, if you see Wolverine's hair is a little big there, it's because he's got hair extensions for Van Helsing and he had to shove them all under a wig. But I shouldn't even point that out. Another thing I wanted to do with the scene, besides show some open closure, so to speak, regarding Jean between Cyclops and Wolverine, was also to show that things were back to normal. The ex-kids were back, back at the mansion. School was back in session, and we were trying to think of what the lesson should be, and then I thought it would only be fitting that it would be about the once and future king.
Yes, I think it will be.
And then once again reminding the audience of the relationship between Xavier and Magneto, and that they're both still alive, still out there, doing their thing. And then as we return back to Alkali Lake, which is now busted wide open and expanded across the forest because of the ruptured dam, we see something in the water, and for fans, they know what they're looking at. They know the comic book lore, but even for a non-fan or someone who hasn't even seen the first X-Men picture, it's not important that that be delineated or be specific. It's just important that it be seen.
Are you happy with it?
With what?
The movie.
Oh, yeah, happier than I was with the first picture. We had a lot of limitations in the schedule and having to provide a lot and money and also in having to provide so much exposition with X-Men 1, where it had a lot of moments and things in it and characters that I liked a lot. It wasn't completely the film I really would have wanted to make. This is much closer to that. There's still things I would have liked to have done, but are you happy with it?
Yeah, I think I think it's evolution. I think we've evolved character-wise, story-wise. I'm not quite sure why you want the next one to be a musical, though.
Well, Hugh Jackman, for those of you who don't know, is a baritone, and quite a brilliant baritone. Before X-Men 1, he was playing Curly in Oklahoma in a stage production in London. And, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm excited about it. I've always felt that there's sort of a rhythmic musical underpinning to the X-Men franchise. In particular, if you go back and look at the comics, they always sang out to me.
Well,
The idea of bringing Rob Marshall in for the choreography, I don't know if I'm
Well, you've
totally
seen
in
Chicago.
agreement with. I did see Chicago, but I think you're really underestimating your own capacity for choreography.
No, no. Well, I thought it was tremendous, actually.
I'm a little nervous about the X line dance.
Well, it's not like it's anything we haven't seen before.
It's true. Maybe musical really isn't the right thing, you know?
Well, Cabaret wasn't exactly a musical. It was sort of a movie with music in it. It kind of, I think if you look at that as a template, as kind of a.
It's true.
I mean, Alan was in Cabaret, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. And, actually, if you look at Dan and Mike's writing, and it could be sung.
Oh, I completely agree. I found myself...
It could be.
I found myself singing it right back to them every day. What?
How does it feel to know you're not one of a kind? With adamantium flowing through your brain.
So this was fun because particularly because of our working history. Tom and I, you wouldn't know it, but we sometimes look for commercials to do together just because we don't get to see each other enough on the movies. So we find opportunities to do stuff together in between pictures while he's in between movies and I'm developing material.
And we like hanging out together, but when you can hang out together and get paid for it, it's just that much sweeter.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, we've had a lot of fun on commercials, trying out new things that sometimes we bring into the films, or sometimes we realize we shouldn't bring into the films.
Mm-hmm. But it's funny. It's a process, our working relationship, because it has literally come to a silent language of finger pointing, and it's all about the slow creep.
Yeah.
In the first film, it's very important to point out actually that the first film was actually my first film shot with anamorphic lenses, the first X-Men, and although it gave a strong negative and was good for visual effects, anamorphic is when you actually shoot. You shoot the film into a squunched, like a squeezed-in format on the film, and then it's expanded later into the 235 format. And this time we went back to Super 35, which was what we used for The Usual Suspects and Apt Pupil, and what that provided us was ability to shoot in lower light situations or to do more
and also
lighting.
there was a on Usual Suspects we had a very small budget, we had a very limited schedule, and one of the ways that we were able to keep it very much alive and have a lot of movement into it was by creating a combination of a dolly and a zoom to have this sort of subtle movement that was floating through a scene. We had 22 pages in the office where Kaiser Soze is being, or Kevin Spacey's character is being interrogated. And that was a technique that we used very successfully, I thought, to keep movement, to have subtle movement, elegant movement that didn't overcome the story and what was going on. And we used it again in Apt Pupil, and maybe in a way doing the first X-Men where we did everything on a dolly or crane or whatever, and we didn't use the zoom as much, or these subtle, slow moves in, was a good way to sort of take a step back and realize that we didn't need to rely on it quite as much. And then going into X2, bringing it back in and letting you really punctuate those moments, I thought was liberating again. And
also we can do complex masters too, so we can by having a zoom lens, all of a sudden you can move the camera from a wide scene over here to a tighter composition over there, and then then cut into that and cut it up, and it creates the illusion that we had the camera in more places, and it did more setups than we actually needed to do in a given amount of time. So again, we could shoot much more flexibly and aggressively.
I think the difference between anamorphic and Super 35 as formats is getting less and less, and more indistinguishable than it once was some years ago. But I think the widescreen, for especially when you have an ensemble film like X-Men, is so useful because it rather than relying on cuts, you can put people in all different areas of the frame. You can really use the space and the geography, and I think that's something that was pretty successful here.
I think the next film we're going to demand digital intermediate through the whole film, so you can have the more flexibility in treating the film. We did some digital intermediate stuff here, where you transfer to digital, and then you can fix different problems, bring up certain things, alter color, even finesse the look of an actor or actress who's a bit tired that morning.
The fact that an audience is watching this movie now is a miracle, considering how little time we had in post production to do something which film which had almost 900 visual effects when we started.
Probably in the end it had probably over 1,000.
Yeah, out of 3,500 shots. And when we started doing the color correction for this film and had barely over a week to do it, we were still missing 450 shots. So it's you know, it's just amazing that we were able to get this done on time. And
the film also had
theater.
well, it's in many theaters. The film had the widest release of a film on a single day or in a single 72-hour period in history, in the world, about 90 countries simultaneously, which was about 11,000 theaters. And so it was a real testament to aggressive post-production. But next time around, we'll
not have to
do
work
the digital
weekends
stuff.
at the lab.
I don't know if we'll shoot digitally yet.
Yeah, no.
I don't know. Got to talk to George about that.
You never know.